Comic book fans know it's impossible to pack all of the subtlety, nuance, and overall zaniness from a publication into a movie or television show. But that's not going to stop us from complaining when they don't get it exactly right.
No need to get your little panties in a bunch.
To distract or appease their rabid fan base, producers often fill the adaptation with hidden references and jokes. The Umbrella Academy is no exception, and if you watched the show on Netflix, you might have missed out on some of these secret Easter eggs while you were busy jamming out to the awesome soundtrack. But don't worry. In the Umbrella Academy, Vanya earned the ire of her family by writing a tell-all autobiography about her life growing up with Sir Reginald and her adopted siblings.
Dad!
Although Extraordinary My Life is Number 7 didn't earn her any favors with her brothers and sisters. At least Sir Reginald kept the copy she gave him even if he never actually read it. When Vanya returns to her childhood home and pulls the book off the shelf, you can see there's an endorsement on the back by none other than Gerard Way. He was one of the co-founders of the band My Chemical Romance and wrote the Umbrella Academy comic books upon which the series is based. His endorsement says, quote, "An incredible read, ... a revealing portal into the life of Vanny Hargreaves and the life she has lived. I couldn't put it down." At least Vanya got to live out the dream of having a monkey as a butler. Pogo was certainly fond of the children, although his loyalty ultimately seemed to lay with Sir Reginald.
Sir Reginald Hargreaves made me what I am today.
When the children gathered together at the house following Sir Reginald's passing, Pogo talks about the time when their brother Five disappeared. He says Vanya would leave out peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches in case her brother returned feeling peckish.
I'm pretty sure I stepped in half those peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches.
When Five eventually does return home, the first thing he does is fix himself a peanut butter and marshmallow sandwich. Apparently they don't have marshmallow fluff in the future in this fictional universe. While Klaus is looking for things to pawn, his siblings are more interested in investigating what happened the night their father passed away. During one scene, Allison disturbs Sir Reginald's office, and when she walks in you can see a framed newspaper clipping. It's about the Eiffel Tower. But it's more than just a mere set piece. It's a reference to the Umbrella Academy comic books. The first issue is called The Day the Eiffel Tower Went Berserk, and tells the story of the Umbrella Academy attending to an attack happening in Paris, France. Oh, and it turns out the Eiffel Tower is secretly a spaceship, because why not? In the second episode, Run Boy Run, there's a scene where Ben can be seen reading a book. It might not be as exciting as when a writhing mass of tentacles burst out of him, but it does provide some crazy foreshadowing if you look closely. The book he's reading is written by one Anton Chekhov, a well-respected playwright. One of his literary principles concerning keeping details consistent and not introducing things into the story which would never come into play later. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. This definitely seemed to be a sign that although Ben is a ghost in most of the present day, he would have a large part to play at some point. And speaking of foreshadowing, there were a few other moments which pointed towards the conclusion of the first season. But don't beat yourself up if you didn't notice them on the first watch through of the show. When Five travels to the future and finds the bodies of his siblings, it's rather upsetting, but there's one missing face. Five doesn't stumble upon the body of Vanya, which was a super early clue that seemingly powerful characters would have something to do with the upcoming apocalypse. In the rubble, the columns of Vanya's theater are also visible, providing a further clue about her role in this catastrophic event. In the third episode, Extraordinary, Diego finds his mother working on a cross-stitch. While it's easy to get caught up in how weirdly creepy it is to see a robot sewing, take a moment to notice the design. It looks like she's making a moon with chunks of it falling apart. This is a definite nod to the end of the season, which involves the moon being blasted apart. Or maybe it's just another dig at Dum Dum Luther, who spent years of his life on a special mission to the moon.
I didn't really feel like a superhero up there.
We like to think it's a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. The Umbrella Academy isn't the first adaptation of a book actress Ellen Page has appeared in. She was also in the movie Whip It.
We're number two! We're number two!
Which is based on the book Derby Girl by Shauna Cross. Interestingly enough, this movie was alluded to in the fourth episode of the Umbrella Academy called Man on the Moon. In one scene, Allison is standing at a magazine stand poring over a gossip tabloid, but there's an interesting poster nearby. It's an advertisement for a roller derby event, and it's conveniently placed near a magazine called Whip It Snippets. This seems to be a definite callback to the movie Whip It, although we're sad to report there is not a real magazine called Whip It Snippets, not that we checked or anything. Here at Screen Rant, we try to remain neutral and non-judgmental, but we have to say there's just something troubling about a young boy being in a romantic relationship with a mannequin. or, well, half a mannequin. There's no denying Five has been through some serious stuff in his life, and with a limited choice for companionship, he had to make some unsavory choices.
You remember that little mansion just outside the city limits? Where the...
It's really saying something about how crazy this show is that Five's love for Dolores isn't the weirdest thing about it. During one scene, Five and Dolores head to the nursery where Five drunkenly wrote calculations all over the walls. Dating a mannequin is one thing, but defacing a nursery? How ghastly. Later on in the episode, you can see Five and Dolores living in the wreckage of the same nursery with his calculations visible on the wall. This next clue you might have missed was a bit more difficult to spot. In fact, if you didn't pause the show at just the right moment, you probably didn't notice it at all. During the 5th episode, there's a shot of Sir Reginald's notes concerning Vanya and her progress. There's a reference to 00.03, and although it's unclear exactly what this means, it could have something to do with the number 3, Allison. As we later learned, Allison was instrumental in convincing Vanya that she's ordinary and causing her to suppress her powers.
You think you're just ordinary?
The relationship between Five and Dolores is pretty weird, but so is the relationship between Allison and Luther.
Is that what you think this is?
I think there's a reason why you never left.
On the one hand, you know that they're not biologically related to one another, and they didn't exactly have a traditional upbringing. On the other hand, they were raised as siblings, so this will they won't they between them is still kinda icky.
You look great.
When they finally get to have their fantasy dance sequence, it's filled with twinkling lights. These look similar to the lights they had in their secret blanket fort back when they were just a couple of kids. It's as romantic as the love between two adopted siblings, one of whom is mostly made up of gorilla space, can be. During the episode 6, The Day That Wasn't, there's a scene where we see Five making a daring escape from the commission.
I do owe a debt. But it's not to you.
But first, he takes a detour to the briefcase room in order to cause some last-minute mayhem. While he's in there, you can see a set of red gas masks hanging up on the wall. Later on in the 10th episode, the agents who attack the Umbrella Academy are wearing the same gas masks from this scene. We all knew Harold was a bit of a total creep, but of course, he did have a backstory which made you feel pretty bad for him. Like so many of us, Harold dreamed of being a superhero someday, despite the fact that he doesn't have any superpowers. During one of the scenes featuring a young Harold, we see him playing with his toys and referencing someone named the Evil Dr. Terminal.
I'll save you from the evil Dr. Terminal.
In the Umbrella Academy comic books, there's a character named Dr. Terminal, who is a major villain first appearing in issue 3, Dr. Terminal's Answer. Over the course of the series, we heard Allison talking about her beloved daughter Claire many times. We learned that Allison hadn't been able to resist using her powers against her ex-husband as well as her own daughter from time to time.
I heard a rumor that you're really tired.
It's a complicated situation when it comes to being a mother and a superhero, but we did see some heartwarming moments between mother and daughter. One of them involved Allison tucking her daughter into bed when the little girl asked to tell her a story about the Eiffel Tower. This is yet another reference to the Umbrella Academy's trip to the Eiffel Tower in the comic books. Seriously, if you haven't read the one about the Eiffel Tower yet, you should. It's really good. Vanya's character changed quite a bit from the comics to the series, and actress Ellen Page might have had something to do with that. Allegedly, she was hoping that the show version of Vanya would be less over the top and have a slightly more restrained wardrobe. During the episode Changes, we see Harold helping Vanya clean up, and a red strain on her neck happens to resemble the violin string design featured in the comic book character's wardrobe. While this aesthetic looked awesome in the comics, we can definitely see it being a bit difficult to pull off with an actual actress and the limitations of fabric. During the episode White Violin, one of the characters might have looked pretty familiar. While the family is at a bowling alley, a woman comes over and invites Five to play with her son and children his own age.
I would rather chew off my own foot.
Or at least to appear to be his own age, since we're guessing she didn't realize Five is a time traveler. If you thought the woman looked familiar, that's because she also appeared in episode 4. She was the woman who got a front row seat to Klaus traveling in time. Oh, and let's not forget she also appeared at the rave and at the bank robbery. Apparently, this woman just has a knack for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Speaking of time, let's take a look at an interesting detail from the nursery. Little kids' wallpaper tends to not be the most exciting thing to look at, so we don't blame you for not spotting this little detail. At first glance, it seems to scenes of butterflies and kids playing, but take a closer look. You can see a young boy dragging a wagon with something in it. This looks to be a boy pulling along a bald mannequin. Could Five and Dolores have somehow ended up memorialized on this unique wallpaper print? Fans on Twitter pointed it out to actor Aidan Gallagher, who replied by saying, "There's stuff like this planted all over the place. You'll have to watch for it." Don't worry, we will. The second episode of The Umbrella Academy is called Run Boy Run, which is also the name of a song by Woodkid featured in the soundtrack.
Run, boy, run. They're dying.
The episode features Five being pursued by Hazel and Cha-Cha, and it does seem like running is really his best option at this point. But the song and episode name really tie into the comic books because there Five is frequently referred to as the boy. There's no denying that the soundtrack for The Umbrella Academy is amazing, and there are some songs that just got stuck in our head. Early on in the series, the students end up grooving to I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. Yes, it's a classic jam, and even Luther can't help but get into it a little bit. But if you listen closely, the lyrics seem oddly prophetic to the end of the show. One line says, "I think we're alone now, the beating of our hearts is the only sound." Later we see Vanya trapped all alone in the Anquike chamber, and the only sound she can hear is her own heartbeat, which she uses to make her escape. Lots of little kids dream about being able to travel to the moon someday, but Luther actually got to do it. During the third episode of The Umbrella Academy, we see a flashback of Luther's room showing a Lego Stern V-set, which could have been a sign he was going to travel into outer space as an adult. With the exception of Five, all of the Umbrella Academy students have both a birth name and a number. You can see some of these referenced during their introductions into the show. When we see Luther coming out of the door onto the moon, we see he's based out of Moon Station 1. When number 2 Diego shows up, you can see 2 lights on behind him. When number 3 Allison is seen on the red carpet, it's because she's promoting Love on Lone 3. And when Klaus learns of his father's passing, he does so by watching Channel 4. Ignoring the moral issues of Hazel and Cha-Cha's occupation, we can at least all agree their jobs aren't easy by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes they get a little bit of a super obvious help, like when Cha-Cha is trying to track down Hazel and uses a flyer to do so. The flyer is helpfully labeled How to Find Us and features the bird sanctuary where Hazel is headed with his lady love. It's so obvious it might have well said, "Here's a clue." Seriously, how did Hazel manage to survive this long when he can't even give Cha-Cha the slip for more than a few hours? Of course, it's not surprising that there are plenty of references to the Umbrella Academy comic books and the Umbrella Academy series on Netflix. But there are other pop culture references to be found if you know where to look. During one scene, we can see Hazel and Cha-Cha storm into the Umbrella Academy, and they use a method which looks pretty familiar. The way Hazel blasts the lock out of the doorknob looks very familiar to the motel scene from the movie No Country for Old Men. Hazel also keeps their briefcase hidden in the vents within the room he and Cha-Cha stay in, which also happens in that movie. In addition to bird watching, is Hazel a movie buff? During the fourth episode, we see Luther and Diego heading to the library in order to find Five. There's an awesome shot which involves the camera panning up the floors of the building. It's an interesting way to represent comic book panels in a real-world scene. The square openings represent different panels in comic books, and it seems as though each panel represents the time that has passed since the previous panel, even though they're shown at the same time. Next time you see the camera moving up the floors in the building, make sure you take a closer look or two. This is definitely one of those awesome details you could easily miss if you didn't know what you're looking for. During the fifth episode of The Umbrella Academy, we see Five and Dolores walking through the post-apocalyptic future. Now, there's a lot to look at here considering the world is in absolute shambles. But amongst the wreckage, something sticks out as being unusual, even in the context of the wasteland Five and Dolores are in. The power lines are all bent in a strange way, and we wonder what could have happened to cause such a thing. But later on we learn the answer to that when we see Vanya use her powers to move light posts prior to the apocalypse.
Vanya, what?
It was a massive display of strength and left its mark even after the world was brought to ruins. Even though the students of the Umbrella Academy have tried to have normal lives, well, it really didn't work out that way for any of them.
You both know that fun and games are restricted to Saturdays between noon and noon.
But we were just...
Be prepared to do your studies alone. Do you understand?
My greatest disappointment, number 4.
So it's almost kind of sweet to have them doing something as normal as going bowling as a family. When they're at the bowling alley, they even name their lane Umbrella Team as a tribute to the bond they share. However, they're not all equally skilled, and it looks as though Allison is winning while Klaus is coming in last. Maybe she just heard a rumor that she's awesome at bowling. We filled you in on 25 things you probably didn't notice the first time you watched The Umbrella Academy, but we know there are more out there. Did you spot anything we might have missed while we were binge watching the series? If so, share it with us in the comments section, and then click on the subscribe button to get access to more of the latest and greatest videos from us here at Screen Rant. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.